$300,000 sounds like a lot of money. Enough to buy a small house in some parts of America. Enough to pay someone $4,000 a month for more than 6 years. So, if someone reaches retirement with $300,000 saved, they should be doing pretty well. At least, that is what I assumed. But a retirement account is not supposed to last 6 years. It might have to last 20, 30, maybe even 40. Using a starting withdrawal rate of 3.9%, a $300,000 portfolio produces about $11,700 during the first year. Then I added 2 average Social Security benefits. That brings the household's modeled annual income to $61,404. But American households headed by someone aged 65 or older spend an average of $61,432 a year. So after working for decades, collecting 2 Social Security checks, and saving $300,000, this household is still $28 short. And that is before a major home repair, before long-term care, before one spouse dies, before the money has to last longer than expected. Something did not add up. How can someone work for most of their life, save hundreds of thousands of dollars, and still be unable to afford retirement? I started with the explanation most people would probably give. Americans cannot afford to retire because they did not save enough. Maybe they waited too long. Maybe they spent too much. Maybe they ignored their workplace retirement plan. The logic seemed simple. Work. Save consistently. Invest the money, then retire. And personal decisions clearly matter. About half of American households with a worker age 55 or older had no retirement savings in 2022. 32% had neither retirement savings nor a traditional pension. Those numbers are difficult to ignore. But before deciding that people had simply failed to prepare, I needed to know what they were preparing for. How much does retirement actually cost? And how much income has to arrive every year after the paycheck disappears? At first, I expected retirement spending to fall dramatically. No daily commute, no work clothes, no retirement contributions coming out of every paycheck. And for some people, no mortgage. But households headed by someone aged 65 or older still spend an average of $61,432 every year. The largest expense is not travel. It is not entertainment. It is housing, an average of $22,193 a year. Even when the mortgage is gone, the house is not free. There are property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, and eventually something breaks. Then there is transportation, $9,538 a year. Food adds another $7,940. Healthcare adds $7,799. Entertainment averages $3,025. Cash contributions, including gifts and support to others, average $3,158. The exact lifestyle will differ from one household to another. A lower spending household might live on $50,000 a year. The national average in this model is $61,432. A higher cost household can easily move above $75,000. So retirement is not one fixed price. But it is also not cheap simply because work has ended. That changed the question in my notebook. I had been asking how much someone needed to save, but the more useful equation was annual spending, chow, minus guaranteed income equals the retirement gap. And once I saw retirement as a yearly income gap, the next question became unavoidable. How much guaranteed income does the average retiree actually receive? The first layer is Social Security. In 2026, the estimated average retired worker benefit is $2,071 per month. That is $24,852 per year. For a household receiving 2 average retired worker benefits, the total becomes $49,704. That is important income. But against average annual spending of $61,432, The household is still missing $11,728 every year. And for a single retiree, the gap can be much larger. Imagine someone spending $42,000 a year. One average Social Security benefit provides $24,852. That leaves $17,148 still unfunded. Social Security was never the entire retirement plan. It was supposed to be one layer. Another layer used to be the traditional pension. A pension promised a monthly income based on salary and years of service. But in private industry, only 14% of workers had access to a defined benefit pension in the approved research period. Only 9% participated. Defined contribution plans, such as 401ks, are much more common. 70% of private industry workers had access, but only 50% participated. And there is a major difference between a pension and a retirement account. A pension promises an income. A 401k gives you a balance. The worker then has to decide how much to contribute, how to invest it, and how to turn that balance into income without running out. So the retirement equation now looked like this: Social Security plus a pension, if one exists, plus withdrawals from savings, plus any remaining work or other income. If the pension is missing, the savings account has to do more. If there is only one Social Security benefit, the savings account has to do more. If housing is expensive, the savings account has to do more. That left one number I still did not understand. How much yearly income can a retirement balance actually produce? A retirement portfolio looks like a large pile of money, but the retiree cannot spend the entire pile. It has to keep producing income, and it has to survive market declines, inflation, withdrawals, and an unknown number of years. The approved retirement model uses a 3.9% starting withdrawal benchmark for a 30-year retirement. So a $300,000 portfolio produces about $11,700 during the first year. Now the base case can be completed. Two average Social Security benefits provide $49,704. The portfolio provides $11,700. Total income becomes $61,404. Average annual spending is $61,432. That leaves an annual loss of $28. The household is basically at break even, but break even is not the same as secure. There is no real margin for a roof repair, no margin for higher insurance, no margin for helping an adult child, no margin for a medical event, and no margin for the retirement lasting longer than planned. To fill the exact annual gap of $11,728, the household needs approximately $300,718 invested at the 3.9% benchmark. That is the first major discovery. $300,000 is not the amount this household can spend. It is the amount needed to produce the missing $11,700 every year. Then I wanted to know how difficult it would be to build that portfolio. Using a modeled 5% real annual return after inflation and fees, reaching approximately $301,000 requires about $318 per month over 32 years. Start later with 20 years remaining, and the contribution rises to about $732 per month. Wait until only 10 years remain, and the required contribution becomes approximately $1,937 every month. That is more than $23,000 a year. The target did not change. The worker simply lost time, and time was doing much more work than I realized. Starting late creates two losses. There are fewer contributions, and there are fewer years for earlier contributions to grow. So my original hypothesis was partly correct. People who save too little or start too late are more likely to fall short. But another problem was becoming visible. Even someone who did save $300,000 could arrive at retirement with almost no room for error. So, what happens when the future does not follow the average model? The base household was almost exactly balanced. So, I started adding the risks one at a time. The first was housing. Average annual housing spending for households aged 65 or older is $22,193. That cost does not disappear when someone stops working, and even a difference of $10,000 per year can completely change the retirement target. At a 3.9% withdrawal rate, funding an extra $10,000 of annual spending requires approximately $256,410 in additional retirement capital. A recurring $10,000 cost is not only a $10,000 problem, it is a $250,000 portfolio problem. Then there is healthcare. The standard Medicare Part B premium in 2026 is $202.90 per month. There's also a $283 annual deductible. Part D drug plans may have deductibles reaching $615. Covered prescription drug spending is capped at $2,100 out of pocket in 2026. Those protections matter, but Medicare does not make healthcare free. That is why older households still spend an average of $7,799 a year on healthcare, and that does not solve the biggest health-related risk: long-term care. Government research estimates that 70% of adults who survive to age 65 develop severe long-term service and support needs. Among people who use paid care, the projected average lifetime cost is approximately $245,400. Place that number beside the base household's required portfolio. $300,718 was needed just to cover the normal annual income gap. A paid care event averaging $245,400 could consume most of it. The household can do everything correctly under ordinary conditions and still be broken by one extraordinary condition. Then I looked at longevity. At age 65, projected remaining average life expectancy is about 18.3 years for men and 20.9 years for women. But an average is not a deadline. Some retirees will need income for 30 years, some for 40. For a 40-year retirement horizon, the modeled withdrawal benchmark falls from 3.9% to 3.3%. Now, the same $11,728 annual gap requires approximately $355,394. That is $54,676 more, without changing the annual lifestyle at all. The only difference is that the money has to last longer. Then there is widowhood. Two average Social Security benefits provide $49,704 per year. One average benefit provides $24,852. The exact survivor payment depends on Social Security rules, but the household does not normally continue receiving two complete benefits after one spouse dies. Replacing one full average benefit from investments at 3.9% would require approximately $637,231. Expenses may fall when one person remains, but housing, insurance, utilities, taxes, and maintenance rarely fall by half. That is when I realized retirement security cannot be measured only by whether the household reaches a target. It has to be measured by how much damage the plan can survive after reaching it. And that meant I needed to compare three very different retirements. The first household is the prepared couple. They receive two average Social Security benefits totaling $49,704 per year. They have a $500,000 retirement portfolio. At 3.9%, that portfolio produces $19,500 during the first year. Total income becomes $69,204. Their annual spending is $50,000. So the completed result is $69,204 of income, minus $50,000 of spending equals a $19,204 annual surplus. This retirement works. But look at the conditions. 2 Social Security benefits, a large portfolio, controlled spending, low housing costs, no immediate care event, and enough time for the money to compound. The second household is the base couple. They receive $49,704 from Social Security. Their $300,000 portfolio provides $11,700. Total income is $61,404. Spending is $61,432. The result is an annual loss of $28. Mathematically, this household can almost retire. Financially, it is fragile. One persistent $10,000 expense increase creates the equivalent of a $256,000 capital problem. The third case is a single retiree with high fixed housing costs. One average Social Security benefit provides $24,852. A $50,000 portfolio produces $1,950 at 3.9%. Total income is $26,802. Annual spending is $42,000. The result is a $15,198 annual loss. To close the full gap between $42,000 of spending and one average Social Security benefit, the retiree would need approximately $439,692 invested. But this retiree has $50,000. The capital deficit is almost $390,000. Skipping restaurants will not solve that. Canceling a subscription will not solve that. This is not a small budgeting problem. It is a structural income deficit. And if that retiree has only 10 years left to build the $301,000 base target, the modeled contribution is $1,937 per month. For many workers, that amount is not available after rent, food, transportation, healthcare, and debt. So, can an average American afford to retire? Yes, but only when several parts of the equation align. Enough guaranteed income, enough private savings, enough time, controlled housing costs, manageable debt, a retirement date that is not forced too early, and enough margin to absorb health, market, and longevity risks. When several disadvantages overlap, one Social Security benefit, little private savings, high rent or a mortgage, late saving, an employment interruption, or long-term care, retirement can become mathematically unreachable. The account balance matters, but the more important number is the gap between guaranteed income and the expenses that continue for life. So, how does the entire American retirement system score once every number is placed side by side? So, I gave the American retirement system a scorecard. Guaranteed income gets 5 out of 10. Social Security provides a foundation, but for many households, it does not replace the full cost of living. Access to private savings gets 5 out of 10. Workplace plans are common, but participation is uneven, and traditional pensions are rare in private industry. Capital requirements get 4 out of 10. In the base model, approximately $301,000 is needed merely to close an $11,700 annual gap. Cost control gets 4 out of 10. Housing and healthcare are the two largest pressures, and neither can always be reduced quickly. Risk gets 3 out of 10. Longevity, market timing, care needs, and widowhood can change a plan after retirement has already begun. Late start viability gets 2 out of 10. Building the base target in 10 years requires approximately $1,937 every month. Full career viability gets 7 out of 10. Starting early, receiving employer support, and controlling housing costs can make the numbers work. Overall affordability gets 4 out of 10. Retirement is possible, but it is fragile, and it is distributed very unevenly. I started this investigation thinking retirement was mostly a test of discipline. Save enough, wait long enough, and eventually work turns into freedom. I still think saving matters, starting early matters, using an employer plan matters. But the numbers change the way I understand the problem. A $300,000 account sounds enormous until it becomes $11,700 a year. Two Social Security benefits sound secure until one disappears. A retirement plan can reach break even and still be one health event away from failure. The system did not simply replace pensions with investment accounts, it transferred uncertainty. Workers are now expected to estimate how long they will live, what markets will return, how much healthcare will cost, and how much income they can withdraw without running out. I thought retirement was the reward for working long enough, but work alone does not fund retirement. Guaranteed income, savings, housing, health, and time decide whether the numbers work. The final equation was simpler than I expected. Annual spending minus guaranteed income equals the retirement gap, and that gap determines how much private wealth someone actually needs. For the base household, $61,432 of spending minus $49,704 of Social Security leaves $11,728 per year. Funding that gap at 3.9% requires approximately $300,718. But the real danger is everything the equation cannot predict: housing, healthcare, longevity, widowhood, and care. So the question was never only, why did Americans fail to save enough? The better question was, when did retirement become a lifetime of risk that each worker was expected to finance alone?